I can't go up to someone on the street and say, you know, have you been tested for, you know, if I have a list of known contagious diseases in my back pocket, and I pull out the sheet and I say, hey, have you been tested for all of these contagious diseases? And they say, well, first, you know, maybe they just tell me to piss off because, you know, who the hell am I, you know, asking these private questions. But say they, you know, say I'm wearing a uniform of some kind, and so then they're like, oh, I better answer this guy. And so they say, well, you know, I had a checkup recently. You know, I think I'm fine, but you know, I can't say I've been tested specifically for all of these on your list here. And then I say to them, oh, well, then you could possibly have one of these. Isn't that true? And then they say, well, I guess. I don't think so. I don't have any symptoms. Well, yeah, you know, but you could be asymptomatic, right? And so you could possibly have one of these contagious diseases and be spreading it to people all around, right? Like, how selfish of you, how careless, right? You know, so what I'm gonna have to do right now is, you know, put this mask on you and, you know, install this app on your phone and track you and you know, put you through a battery of tests, and, you know, depending on my test results, you know, carry out certain treatment, and, you know, I'm gonna have to quarantine you and blah, 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 right? Like, if I just did that to someone on the street, most people, I would hope everyone would agree that that's not legitimate. But that's the same thing. Like, there's no difference. There's no difference between me doing that and someone who's a state employee doing that. It doesn't make it okay just because they have that title, or just because they're wearing a uniform, or just because, you know, they're wearing a white coat. It doesn't make committing aggression, actual, real aggression, and yes, forcing people to put things on their body or in their body, or to, you know, take tests against their will, that is aggressive, no matter how good of an idea you think it is or how necessary you think it is to prevent the spread of an illness. It still is technically an aggressive act, and it's being done in the name of a possible harm being done. You may possibly have this disease. You may possibly then, if you have this disease, possibly transmit it. And then when you possibly transmit it, they may possibly get sick from it. And then they may possibly die from it, right? Again, a whole sandwich of possibilities that we're being told we should just ingest and digest as totally sound and reasonable, and you know, just being a caring, considerate, thoughtful person for all, you know, for all those out there that might be getting sick. I mean, this is just ridiculous, and for people to not get this, I can be understanding, right? Because it's taken me some time to be able to articulate it. It always struck me as wrong, but I haven't been able to, like, say specifically what's wrong about it. So I hope for those of you that have known this is wrong, but you haven't been able to say it clearly why it's wrong, and, you know, and other people have been able to, like, basically guilt trip you into complying because there's this confusion as to whether it's right or wrong. Well, here's the clear black and white of it. Real violence is not justified because of theoretical violence. You can't commit real violence against someone because they may commit violence against someone else. It's that simple. That's the crux of it. And that's what you're never, ever going to hear on the mass media. That's what you're never, ever going to hear, right, coming from these politicians' mouths, right? They're never going to break it down like that, because this is like the core truth, the crucial truth about good and evil that is being completely left out of the picture, so that they can generate this confusion, right? Appeal to people's emotion, guilt trip, right? Have this stir of information and you know, horror stories and emotional appeals, so that you can't think logically, so that you can't see what the clear right and wrong of it is. And the clear right and the wrong of it now, and has always been the case since the beginning of time, and will continue to be the case for forever, is that it's not legitimate to commit violence against someone because you believe they may possibly harm someone else, right? That's just not legitimate. That's what preemptive attack is, and preemptive attack is not a legitimate action. It's not an exception to the rule of violence being an evil. It's just another form of violence. It's just another form of evil. It's just, rather than it being upfront, like, hey, I don't like you, and so I'm going to punch you in the face, just upfront violence, it's, I'm punching you in the face in the name of safety, right, for the greater good, right? So it's just violence, packaged, put with some gift wrap propaganda, on delivery. So if preemptive attack is not part of your vocabulary, and you actually care about the world, and you actually want there to be less violence and less injustice, and less gravitation towards this communist, like totalitarian dystopia type, technocracy, etc. That seems, to be gaining momentum. You need to have this term in your vocabulary. You need to be able to utilize this term because it's really at the crux of what's going on. It's preemptive attack being done to entire global populations. And if you think that preemptive attack is sometimes legit, well, then they have you, right? Then they have the upper hand, and then they're just going to continue with it, and it's just, probably going to get worse. But if you can take the moral absolutist stance, and that's not a bad phrase, by the way, to be a moral absolutist in certain things, The moral relativism is, king and universities and such. They touting it as wisdom, but it's not at all. If you can't stand firmly on the ethical truth that violence is wrong, initiating violence is wrong, just like slavery is wrong, no exceptions, and preemptive attack is just a form of violence, so it's also an evil, it's that same evil, just a different form of it. If you can't stand in that, well, then they're just going to keep being able to manipulate and control and harm the whole, society, the whole global population for their own purposes, right? Always in the name of safety, right? Always virtue signaling that they're doing this for the poor old people, right? But meanwhile, they're committing violence against everybody, right? They're increasing the amount of violence and harm being done exponentially, in the name of keeping everyone safe, right? If we're living under a totalitarian society where we're all under daily bodily control, we're all experiencing the abuse of that form of violence on a daily basis. That isn't an improvement. The world is not a better place under that condition. We're not safer if we're being abused every day. We're not safer if our bodily autonomy is not being recognized. We're not safer if people are treating our bodies as if it is their property, right? A slave is not safe, right? You could say, oh, well, if you're in a prison cell, you're nice and safe, right? Well, what kind of safety is that, right? Real safety means freedom from aggression, right? Safety includes not being enslaved, right? I don't think anyone can, argue, well, if you're enslaved by someone, well, at least you're safe, that people wouldn't call it a safe condition, right? One of the forms of violence that, has been going on for centuries is, someone being kidnapped and enslaved, right? Whether that's prisoner of war or whatever, right? That person that has been taken and controlled in that way is not safe, right? They're under constant aggression. They're under a constant form of abuse. So preemptive attack, zero exceptions to the rule. It's always wrong. If someone is yelling at you for not wearing a mask, you tell them, you're advocating violence towards me and speaking to me on top of that in an aggressive, violent manner because I might theoretically be harming someone, right? And that's not legitimate. You're committing real violence against me and advocating further violence, right? They want to call the police and have more violence put against you. So they're committing violence right at you immediately, verbally, right? And then they want to up that to include physical violence against you, right? I had this woman, call me all these names, say I was selfish, and actually say, oh, I hope you get sick and die, right? So this verbal filth, right? This aggressive speech directed towards me because I may theoretically be harming someone, right? So she's committing a wrong act because I may possibly be harming someone else, even though the chances of that are next to zero, right? And her committing the aggressive act is 100% clear. It's what's actually occurring. So that's the main point. Real violence is bad, and it isn't justifiable because you say it may be preventing some harm being done because of some theoretical possibility, right? Now this should be just like core understanding. This should be like core ethics that should be like taught in schools around the world. What are the chances of that? Probably, next to nothing, especially if they're state schools. But this is just like fundamentals of right and wrong that need to be understood if we're going to get things back in a virtuous, ethical direction and prevent things from getting even worse. All right, thanks a lot for listening. Peace.